All right, hello and welcome. I have for you today a review of the book The Forge of God by Greg Bear. I read this one a little while ago. I just went back to it to revisit it for the purpose of this review, so I've kind of read it 1.5 times, I guess you could say. Second time was kind of skimmy. This is a book that I heard the name Greg Bear somewhere where I was looking for hard sci-fi, and this book was written in the 1980s, I think 87 original version of it. I of course read it on Kindle, so whatever. There's been new editions of it and stuff, but I don't know the exact, process of all that. It's a hard sci-fi book about first contact, and I want to try to avoid spoilers as much as possible, so I'm going to be talking about certain aspects of the story in very vague terms, because I don't want to ruin what actually happens in the story, because I'm actually going to give this one a pretty positive recommendation. I'm not going to say that, I'm going to say that I'm a little skeptical that the second one can be as good as the first one, so I'm not sure, when I'm going to go look at the second book in the series, because apparently it's book one of two in like a particular like mini-series of books. But like this one had some aspects to it that I think are going to be hard to reproduce in a sequel, and I'm not going to explain why, but I'm just going to say that so that you're aware of it, and that I'm pretty strongly recommending this first one. It's pretty good. It's pretty good hard sci-fi. I would say that there's not a whole lot in there that I raise an eyebrow at. And some of the minor aspects are kind of like, well, maybe this is the way that they decided to do it, and maybe this isn't what they needed to do. Like maybe this is overkill or whatever. But all in all, the concepts were pretty reasonable. There were some interesting new ideas in it. Things that I'd kind of not seen before. There were some good explanations of them. Not amazing explanations, but pretty decent. And just in general, some really cool ideas in this book. As opposed to The Object, for instance, which I reviewed a couple of weeks ago, I will say that this book actually has a lot of really interesting characters. They have intriguing developments. You actually care about these characters, and you mourn with them when certain things happen. Just to give you one of the intriguing developments of one of the characters that kind of plays into the story, and this isn't a spoiler because you hear about it in like the first 2 chapters or something like that. One of the characters is like some kind of scientist. I forget exactly what his field is, but early in the story, we find that he has cancer and it's probably terminal. And so part of his development and the development of the characters around him is dealing with the fact that he's kind of wasting away, and he has better moments and worse moments, and it gives him a unique perspective on the things that are happening in the world at the time as well. And so this is a really good way to do character development. You have someone in a slow development that probably terminates in their end. They don't know, right? They're doing everything they can to not die from freaking cancer, but they have friends and they have family, and they have interactions with them, and those other people have interactions with other people, and the fact that they have this friend who's dying of cancer affects the way that they interact with other people, and so it's this very nice effect that kind of spiderwebs out from a character that gives a lot of extra twinges of motivation to other characters, and really helps things out. Plus, the fact that he's kind of dying of cancer gives him a very unique philosophical perspective on things, which was another aspect of the story that I liked a lot. This story is kind of a slow burn. It's not like, woo, crazy stuff happening all the time. There's occasional spikes of action, but in general, it's a pretty slow burn. It's well plotted. It has some really cool ideas for misdirection in it, in a variety of ways. You never really know for sure, or at least you start out thinking you know what's going on, then you discover that you don't, and then you discover that you do, but you're not sure if you do. You're never sure, because Greg Bear does a very good job of making it so that you aren't really sure whether you're being told the truth by certain characters, by certain entities in the story. And it's a question that goes throughout the whole story to the very end, where you're to like the last third of the story, where at that point you're pretty sure that X, Y, and Z are happening, but you still don't quite trust this character or this entity or this thing until the very, very end when you see what's actually happening. And even then, you don't know for sure I think that there's a good reason to maybe question, how much of what happens at the very end is what should be done, and how much of it is, the fact that they're dealing with some kind of entity that is basically giving them orders that they really don't have much of a choice but to follow. And so there's a lot of really cool gray areas to play around with here. There's a lot of really cool ideas. There's a lot of intrigue, political intrigue, because the story is about first contact on Earth, and all the political ramifications are in there as well. I mean, not all, but we see some aspects of that. And it manages to have this intrigue without being bombastic or cliche, which is really nice to see. There's no there's no obvious character who's a spy or something like that. It's all kept pretty low key. It's all kept very believable, and so I really enjoyed that aspect of it. What I will say is that the story overall is very depressing. If you're not in the mood for a depressing story, I would say avoid it until you have that capacity to deal with it. And the question is whether it's so depressing, does that work well as a setup for later stories? Was that the intention? And so I looked it up today just to check, and it's only book 1 of 2 in a small miniseries by this author. And so, it's not really that intense of a setup. It's not like depressionness for that huge of a saga. He doesn't turn, my understanding is that he doesn't turn this story into a massive space opera, which is something that I would be really afraid of doing. Because generally speaking, space operas and military space stuff have pretty thin characters, and it's all about there's an invasion here and blah, 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 and all this military stuff, as opposed to actual in-depth thinking about the characters and how they're interacting with each other. I mean, there's still always some of that, but, less so in most military space operas that I've seen compared to this. Another good thing that the book does is it does a really good job of capturing different people's reactions to the situation that they're facing. Again, without spoiling anything, there's some pretty heavy stuff that goes on in this book, and different characters react to it in different ways. They're believable. They interact with each other in different ways because of what's going down. There's a lot happening in this story character-wise that I think is, really nice to see in a hard sci-fi story, because as we've seen in the past, it can be neglected, and you can end up with these really thin characters that never really feel like they care about each other. Whereas you definitely get the feeling in this story that characters do care about each other. It's one of those things that, when a character has something bad happen to him or her, that we get a breath, a little time to have other characters mourn for their loss, whatever that loss happens to be, right? We get to see that in various places in the story, and that slows down the pace, but it really improves the characterization. I think it's a win as far as trade-offs go. As you can see, this is a pretty positive review. I would strongly recommend this. I would pretty strongly recommend this book if you like hard science fiction, if you like first contact stories, and if you're okay with a depressing book. If you tick all those boxes, then give this book a chance. I'd say it's worth your time. It's not super long either. It's not a crazy long read. However, as always, I'm going to try to kind of make a few points about things that I think were a little bit less than amazing in it. Let's see. The ending. At the very end of the book, a narrator pops in all of a sudden and basically explains a bunch of stuff that was left ambiguous up until that point. In fact, the actual characters that we've been following, were asking each other questions about this topic right before the narrator butts in. And right at the end, the narrator butts in and answers a bunch of questions for you that I think really would have been better off left unanswered. And it's about what is the nature of this species that mankind met its first contact with, and what actions are justified on behalf of humanity, vis-a-vis this alien race, and there's also further questions about what has become of this alien race in the time since they sent out their first contact probe, right? And these things should have been left unanswered. But what in fact happens is that at the very end of the book, there's like a paragraph where a narrator hops in. He's like, "Oh, by the way, this and this and this and this and this are true, but you know, the law is the law," kind of thing. And I found that ending to be a little bit tacked on, maybe. It's one of those things where I would much rather have learned the things that they told us like if they hadn't told me those things, then I probably would have jumped on the second book, because I would have wanted to know, how this alien race developed, because it's not an FTL story, right? Basically, mankind gets first contact, but the entity that contacts mankind hasn't seen the race that originated it in thousands of years or more, right? And so, like, just being told, "Oh yeah, this and this and this and this are true," is like, "Oh, I guess I don't care about the next story then." I would have liked to see more details on how the alien weapons worked and stuff like that. You get some answers, but not really a fully satisfying set of answers. And this might be my physicist background, speaking, in the sense that I'm like, "Ooh, but I want to know how this thing worked." And maybe it's better that we didn't have the author try to write how this worked and then write a bunch of things that seem unphysical and turn this from a good hard sci-fi story into a mediocre soft sci-fi story. And so that's kind of an iffy question on my end. I would have liked a little bit more detail. I don't want the author to go into so much detail that he ruins the hardness of the sci-fi. And then the other thing, and you can see that my list of criticisms is pretty small at this point, but my last one is that there are some of these chapters in this book that are like 500 words or something like that. Like, you blink and they're gone. And I found it a little bit jarring sometimes to be starting to read a chapter and be getting into what's going on in the chapter, and then it skips out and you go to a different perspective in the next chapter. It was a little jarring sometimes. It wasn't bad, but it was one of those things where I was like, man, this chapter was like 200, 300, 400 words. And then we're on to this other thing, all of a sudden. And it's like, in general, the story is good about slowing down when slowing down needs to happen. But at the same time, there were a few places where I was like, I would like more, please, of this stuff. And you just skipped it and we're gone, and okay. But yeah, those are the only real criticisms I have about this book. In general, I would say that it's a pretty solid hard sci-fi story. If you meet the 3 criteria that I gave a little earlier in the review, I would say go give it a read. I'm thinking about having just reskimmed it again, because I read it and I was like, man, it's decent, but I had other things to do. But having reskimmed it again for this review and gotten my ideas a little bit more, I might go check out the second book, because maybe I do want to know what happens to this stuff. But I'm a little worried that it's going to turn into a space opera. And, I can't say that, like, the author said that it was going to turn into a space opera, but at the same time, like, I'm worried about it. Because everybody loves space opera, and, like, turning this character-heavy book into a space opera, 20 years later on a colony ship flying towards blah, 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 blah. I don't know if I don't know if that could possibly reach the heights that the Forge of God reached. Anyway, I rambled there for a second, but basically, this is a recommend if you meet the criteria that I mentioned earlier in the thing. If you don't, maybe look at the sample, see if it's something up your alley, or maybe wait a little while, especially if you're in, like, I don't feel like a depressing story. You might want to definitely hold off on it until you feel like you're in a better mindscape for that. Anyway, thanks for watching, thanks for listening. And if you have any thoughts on this, on my perspectives here in the book, or if you've read it yourself and you want to talk about it, feel free to drop a comment in the video. And yeah, see you all next time. I don't have my next review planned out yet, but we'll see what it is. It might be, I might give the Lensman series a look, because I can't even remember the name of the author at this point, but I bought the books, and they're like a bunch of little science fiction novellas, pulpy stuff. And so I might give those a look and kind of talk about them for a bit. Anyway, thanks again, and I'll see y'all next time. Have a good week.